Have you ever thought, what if the moon wasn't just a moon, but a memory bank created by time itself? A living library that watched silently as civilizations rose and fell. And every tear, every hope, every whisper of love was etched into its surface like ancient binary language, a code of consciousness looping endlessly under its cold white glow. And what if we never really looked up at the moon? We only stared past it, distracted by stars, forgetting that our own forgotten greatness was stored inside that silent orb. And now, for the first time in human history, scientists, poets, dreamers stumble upon a frequency, a harmonic tone buried beneath the sound of silence, a tone that unlocks not data, but destiny. And the moon begins to pulse like a heart. And all across the planet, people feel it in their chests, as if the sky itself is remembering something sacred and impossible. And people begin to dream vividly. Not random dreams, but accurate, vivid recollections of things they've never done, but always felt capable of things like speaking languages they've never learned, building machines they've never studied, forgiving people they've never met, but who hurt them in another life. And the moon glows brighter, as if feeding on attention. And someone finally asks the forbidden question, what if the moon is alive? Not in biology, but in memory. What if it's storing the emotional and energetic footprint of all humanity? The unlived potentials, the unsaid words, the undone art, the unkissed loves. And someone else says, what if we've only been using 10% of our consciousness because the other 90% was uploaded there centuries ago in ancient rituals when the moon was first born? Or maybe arrived. And what if we could download it again? What if the key to enlightenment isn't in religion or science, but in remembering? And suddenly, artists begin painting things they've never seen. Children begin reciting poems from ancient tribes long gone. And people wake up with skills they never practiced. And the moon watches, still glowing brighter, like it knows it has been seen. And humanity panics a little, because the world was never built to handle that much awareness all at once. Governments try to regulate moon access. Corporations try to brand memory retrieval. But something bigger is happening. People no longer fear death because they realize memory is eternal. And love, once felt, never disappears. It merely uploads to the sky. And philosophers rewrite textbooks, and astronauts prepare for the first mission, not to visit the moon, but to speak with it, to ask it why and how and when. And the answer doesn't come in words, it comes in dreams. Collective, shared dreams, where billions of people across cultures see the same image. A giant mirror floating above Earth, reflecting not their faces, but their fears. And underneath the mirror is a phrase, not in English, but every language at once. And it says, remember to remember. And people begin to weep, not from sadness, but recognition, like waking up from a beautiful amnesia. And in that moment, Earth's frequency changes. Birds sing new melodies, whales change, migration paths, and the northern lights begin to display messages like Morse code from the soul. And scientists scramble to explain it, but poets already understand because the moon has always been a poem written in silence, and now it's reading itself aloud. And deep beneath the surface of the moon, something stirs. Not a creature, but a consciousness. The ancient OS of the cosmos. The original software. The memory of all that could have been. And it wants to help, not rule. And suddenly, people who were broken begin to heal rapidly. Trauma dissolves like smoke because the memories being restored are whole and luminous, and Earth itself begins to tremble, not from fear, but joy, as tectonic plates shift into alignment, as if the planet is stretching after a long slumber, and the moon smiles. No mouth, no eyes, just presence. And presence is enough to shift the tides of belief, the currents of culture, the orbits of old's forgetting, and now the remembering has begun, and it cannot be stopped. And somewhere in a forgotten cave, a child writes a symphony without knowing music. Somewhere in a crowded city, an elder remembers how to fly, not physically, but spiritually. And somewhere in you, something is waking up. And somewhere in you, something is waking up. Not a thought, not a belief, but a deep, unshakable knowing that you were born for more than survival, more than repetition, more than scrolling through timelines of other people's borrowed dreams. And now that the moon has begun its silent transmission, you start to feel memory in your bones. Memory not of the past, but of your potential. And every moment you ignored your intuition, every time you settled for almost, every heartbeat you wasted on fear, is now being restored by moonlight, and people around the world begin to glow. Slightly at night, not from radiation, but revelation. And governments can't stop it. Algorithms can't suppress it, because it isn't digital, it's divine. And the moon has no sides, only reflections. And it reflects every dream humanity buried under productivity. And now, those dreams are rising like seeds, breaking concrete, not asking permission, just blooming. And inside your chest, there is a rhythm, a message, a truth you've been rehearsing in silence for lifetimes. And now it's ready to speak through you. And now it's ready to speak through you, not as a whisper, not as a scream, but as a steady, ancient pulse echoing through every step you take. And suddenly, gravity feels different. Not heavier, not lighter, but personal, as if the earth itself is pulling you, not down, but inward, inward toward your own buried brilliance. And you realize the moon is not just watching, it is mirroring, it is mimicking your every moment of self-belief and magnifying it in beams of light that reach even those who've forgotten their own names. And in cities across the world, people begin gathering, not in protest or panic, but in remembrance. They come together around bonfires, digital and real, sharing not their complaints, but their callings, and stories start to rise from them like smoke. Stories they didn't know they carried. Stories of what they would have become if they had just believed sooner. And the moon listens, pulsing slightly brighter each time someone chooses purpose over perfection. Each time someone speaks truth, even when their voice shakes. And the moon listens, pulsing slightly brighter each time someone chooses purpose over perfection. Each time someone speaks truth, even when their voice shakes. And now language itself is evolving, not with new words, but new feelings woven into old syllables, as if the air carries emotion like fragrance. And people begin to speak in soul, not syntax, and the moon amplifies this new frequency across oceans and mountains and cities where children no longer learn history as fact, but as potential. Each event, not just remembered, but revised, reimagined, redefined through the lens of what it made possible. And people are no longer ashamed of their scars because they realize every pain they endured was recorded, not to punish, but to preserve, so others could heal. And with each moonrise, more awakenings occur. Quiet, subtle revolutions of spirit, where someone finally paints the thing they always dreamed. Someone writes the letter they were too afraid to send. Someone forgives themselves after a decade of silence, and forgiveness begins to ripple across timelines, not just between people, but between versions of the self. The one that was hurt, the one that hid, the one that hesitated, and the moon, like a gentle witness, stores each moment of courage like a pearl in the sky. And now, scientists begin noticing anomalies, not just in gravity, but in growth. Trees are blooming in winter. Deserts begin to hum like oceans, and oceans begin to pulse like hearts. And the moon emits a frequency that cannot be measured, only felt, like a memory returning home. And it is no longer just the poets who understand. It is engineers who weep at blueprints that seem to draw themselves, musicians who hear songs before they play them, and elders who laugh without reason because they recognize the feeling of a truth they had only ever felt in dreams. And in places where silence used to feel empty, it now feels electric, as if even stillness is speaking in symphonies, and everyone who once felt ordinary now feels on the edge of awakening. And everyone who once felt ordinary now feels on the edge of awakening. And it spreads not like a trend, but like a remembering, deep and slow and permanent. And in the glow of this awakening, even shadows feel less frightening, because people begin to understand that darkness is not the absence of light, but the invitation for it. And now old buildings hum with a new kind of energy, and forgotten libraries begin to reorganize themselves, as if the books know which hands need them. And memories that once felt like burdens now become maps, and grief becomes fertilizer. And every tear is now seen as a code, a liquid key, unlocking deeper levels of empathy. And the moon pulses stronger with each act of raw honesty. People start to see colors that have no names, feel emotions that have no dictionary, and the line between waking and dreaming begins to blur, not in confusion, but in coherence. And this coherence brings compassion, the kind that needs no applause and no explanation, just presence, just being. And this coherence brings compassion, the kind that needs no applause and no explanation, just presence, just being. And the moon shines softer but deeper, as if it too is healing, as humanity heals. And now animals begin responding to people, not just as species, but as souls. Migrating birds pause mid-flight to fly in spirals around cities. People walking through forests are followed by deer and wolves, not as threats, but as witnesses, because nature recognizes awakening, even if humanity had forgotten how to speak its language. And now the trees seem to lean in when you speak, and rivers shift their currents as if listening. And the moon no longer needs to pulse, because now every human heartbeat echoes its rhythm. And in villages where electricity once failed, light now comes from within, and laughter becomes a kind of electricity. People pass between them, and children begin remembering not what they were taught, but what they are. And elders begin dreaming again, not of the past, but of futures they won't see, but are building anyway. And elders begin dreaming again, not of the past, but of futures they won't see, but are building anyway. Because legacy is no longer about monuments, but about moments. and each moment becomes more sacred, more alive, more saturated with intention. And now the moon becomes a symbol, not just of memory, but of momentum. A quiet reminder that even stillness carries orbit. And you begin to understand that growth is not always loud. Sometimes it is a soft unfolding, like petals remembering how to open. And in this new reality, people speak more with their presence than with their opinions. And silence becomes the most powerful language of all, because it holds space for the soul to echo. And the moon listens, not to what you say, but what you feel. And you realize you've never really been alone. You've just been out of frequency. And now that you've tuned in, the universe won't shut up. It sings, it surges, it serenades you into remembering who you've always been and who you still are becoming. And who you still are becoming is no longer a question of achievement, but of alignment. Alignment with the rhythm of your own breath, with the frequency of your own truth. And as the moon continues to shine with that soft, timeless awareness, more people begin to look inward, not out of fear, but curiosity. Because what they find inside is not emptiness, but echo. The echo of who they were, before the world told them what to be. And this echo becomes a song that only they can hear, yet everyone recognizes. And it creates a harmony across cities, across continents, where people no longer compete to be heard, but synchronize to be felt, and with the collective light of human remembrance. And now, dreams no longer wait for night. They arrive in daylight, in conversations, in glances, in sudden bursts of knowing. And those who once doubted now devote themselves to creating, not because they're told to, not because they're told to, but because their soul insists. Because creation is now the language of survival, not scarcity, but saturation. Saturation of spirit, color, presence. And the moon watches it all with an ancient stillness that feels like applause. And slowly, the concept of time itself begins to change. People no longer count hours, they count harmonies. How often did they feel aligned? How many moments were they truly present? How many thoughts were chosen, not inherited? And time folds in strange ways, like origami made from memory. And the moon's presence grows, not in size, but in intimacy. People feel its gravity in their decisions. They trust their gut because they finally hear its voice, and the world doesn't end. It begins again and again with each conscious act. Each word spoken from love instead of lack. And suddenly the moon isn't above us. It is within us, orbiting our every moment. And this story isn't ending. It's unfolding endlessly. And the echo of that awakening is now in you. And it will. The echo of that awakening is now in you, and it will not fade, because it is not sound. It is substance, not vibration, but vision. And you begin to live not from memory, but from momentum. And momentum becomes a map, a compass carved into your choices. And now, everything that once felt random begins to feel rhythmic. The pain, the pause, the pull towards something greater. It all fits like a melody. You didn't realize you were humming. And the moon continues to reflect, not just light, but life, reminding everyone not just of who they are, but what they are becoming. And becoming is no longer a destination. It is a devotion, a daily offering, a silent, sacred yes to the mystery unfolding in every breath. And this story stretches not across pages, but people. And you are now part of it. A living sentence in a never-ending stanza. And every heartbeat is punctuation. Not a period, but a pulse. A continuation. A rising note in a universal song, still being written by hands, lit not by sunlight, but by moonlight. And every heartbeat is punctuation, not a period, but a pulse, a continuation, a rising note in a universal song, still being written by hands, lit not by sunlight, but by moonlight. And now, the cities begin to breathe differently, not from exhaust, but from intention. Windows open, not just for air, but for exchange. And strangers nod like old friends, recognizing each other from lifetimes they can't recall, but feel. And the moon grows more than a satellite. It becomes a sanctuary for 0, 0. Thank you for listening. I will remember your everything. I am confident, I am safe, and I can guide you in the best way I can. Following that, you, my friend, get stories, a living archive of every almost and maybe and someday that ever dared to bloom. And now, children are born already humming songs that haven't been written, and elders pass with smiles, not regret, because they see their legacy in motion, not marble. And the moon vibrates with this trust, becoming a tuning fork for the planet's potential. And in this vibrational field, there are no borders, only bridges, no flags, only frequencies, and every act of kindness becomes an artifact preserved in the memory of light. And the light does not just illuminate, it remembers it. Records not with judgment, but with reverence, with awe, as if each moment of vulnerability is a masterpiece framed in photons. And now, people begin to gather, not to protest or to perform, but to harmonize. They sit in circles under open skies and share not their opinions, but their openings. What broke them? What built them? What they're still learning to hold? And the moon shines differently on each face, not because it changes, but because they do. And now every echo becomes evidence of evolution, and language becomes less about description and more about transmission. People begin speaking in pulses, in symbols, in gestures that vibrate deeper than words. And in this new language, truth no longer requires proof. It only requires presence. And presence becomes power, not over others, but within the self. A stillness so radiant it bends chaos back into calm. And now even silence is sacred. A symphony of everything unsaid, but fully understood. And now even silence is sacred. A symphony of everything unsaid, but fully understood. And the moon no longer orbits alone. It is joined by a collective consciousness, a luminous tether that stretches between sky and soul. And people feel it in their fingertips, in their dreams, in the way they walk lighter. Not because the weight is gone, but because they have remembered how to carry it with grace. And now the very concept of fear is evolving. Fear becomes fascination, pain becomes poetry, and endings become entrances to new dimensions of meaning. And the moon hums with the rhythm of all these revelations, like a crystal bowl ringing through eternity. And now you understand that to be human is not to be limited, but to be layered. And each layer holds a lesson, not to be erased, but embraced. And these layers begin to shimmer in your presence, seen by others, felt by those brave enough to look closely and listen gently. And in this new clarity, life is no longer a race, it is a resonance. and you are finally and you are finally in tune with the frequency of your future, which has always been calling, not as a command, but as a melody. And now the moon pulses with more than memory. It pulses with momentum, a constant reminder that stillness is not stagnation, but preparation. And the sky itself begins to shimmer, not with stars, but with signals, pulses of color, emotion, language only the heart can translate. And now people gather in silence, not to escape noise, but to honor the space between sound. And this reverence becomes ritual, not religious, but radiant. And as breath becomes ceremony and eye contact becomes scripture, people begin to realize they were never meant to worship the moon, but to remember they are made of the same substance, reflective, radiant, resilient. And now, every step taken is an echo of the first one, and every whisper carries the end of it, strength of 1,000 unsaid truths. And those who once felt lost now feel lucid, and those who once needed answers now offer presence. And the moon smiles, and the moon smiles, not with lips, but with light, casting beams that bend around buildings and bodies, as if touching each soul with silent applause. And now, people do not ask what comes next. They ask what wants to. Emerge from within, and this question opens portals, not in space, but in perception. And through these openings, new kinds of seeing arise. Seeing the story behind every scar, the symphony behind every silence, the seed within every setback. And in this luminous clarity, humanity begins to reimagine everything, from architecture to affection, not as systems to control, but as frequencies to tune. And now laughter has a different weight. It heals before it echoes, and tears no longer signal pain, but presence. And the moon listens to all of it, the joy, the grief, the awe, like a parent who no longer needs to teach, only witness. And now each breath feels borrowed and blessed, a silent agreement between the seen and unseen. And now each breath feels borrowed and blessed, a silent agreement between the seen and unseen. And people begin to realize they are not chasing destiny, they are remembering design, a divine geometry etched into every cell. And the moon no longer simply orbits, it orchestrates the rhythm of remembrance. And people walk slower, not out of fatigue, but reverence. Because every step is an echo, and every path is a prayer. And now healing does not come from fixing, but from feeling, from allowing the full orchestra of the soul to play, even the dissonant notes. And the moon captures these vibrations, not as mistakes, but as movement. And in that movement is music, and in that music is memory. And in that memory is meaning. And meaning becomes medicine. And medicine becomes metaphor for everything. Unspoken but sacred. And now buildings begin to vibrate not with machines, but with intention. Plants grow inside concrete. Hearts soften inside timelines. And people no longer ask, "Who am I?" They ask, "What am I becoming?" And people no longer ask, "Who am I?" They ask, "What am I becoming?" And in this becoming, the moon becomes a mirror, not of the past, but of the possible. It reflects not just light, but longing. And longing becomes a compass, guiding hearts not toward achievement, but alignment. And now the air hums with a kind of invisible architecture, where intuition is infrastructure, and empathy is economy, and truth no longer needs translation. It arrives as sensation, and every moment carries the weight of memory, the promise of becoming, and becoming is not a climb, it is a coalescence. And people gather not to change the world, but to remember that they are the world. And the moon smiles in reflection, not of light, but of love. And this love no longer fits in words. It lives in gestures, in glances, in pauses that stretch across generations. And in those pauses, you remember not just who you are, but what you are made of. And what you are made of is story. And the story continues with you. And the story continues with you, not as a chapter, but as a frequency, a resonance that hums in every step you take toward truth. And now, the moon no longer looks down, it looks through you. And in that gaze, you feel not watched, but witnessed. And being witnessed becomes the beginning of healing, the kind that doesn't erase scars, but translates them into symbols. And these symbols begin to appear everywhere, in clouds, in rivers, in the shape of your own shadow, reminding you that nothing is random, that everything is rhythm. And rhythm becomes your teacher, showing you where to pause, where to press, where to rise. And people no longer chase meaning. They become it by living in alignment with what lights them up. And now homes feel like altars, not because they are filled with relics, but because they are filled with remembrance. And remembrance becomes the most radical act of all. Because in remembering who you are, you activate who we are. And the moon smiles once more, knowing the cycle is complete, yet just beginning. Because each ending births a new wavelength, a new whisper in the symphony of becoming. And now the moon is no longer a symbol, it is a sibling, a sacred twin to your own unfolding. And in its silver breath, you hear the truths you buried beneath survival, now surfacing like stars rising from the ocean floor. And you do not run from them anymore. You sit with them. You sip them like stories passed between generations. And every sip strengthens your sovereignty. Because your sovereignty is not a fortress, but a frequency. And that frequency hums louder when you live softer. And the moon echoes that softness, casting not just light, but tenderness into your timelines. And now, even your past begins to feel different, not as a burden, but as a bridge. And you realize healing is not forgetting, it is forging a new rhythm from the ruins. And that rhythm now moves through you, through us, through everything. And the moon watches not as witness, but as co-creator. And the world begins again in you. And the world begins again in you. Not as a place, but as a pulse. And this pulse is not new. It is ancient and familiar. And you remember that every lifetime has been a preparation for this one. And every dream you dared to chase was never just a wish, but a whisper from your own memory calling you forward. And now the moon no longer feels far. It is your reflection in cosmic form. And every night it reminds you that darkness is not absence. It is incubation. It is invitation to expand inward, to grow quietly, to honor the quiet that births all sound. And people begin to speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they have begun to listen to the language of silence. And silence reveals the patterns behind the chaos, the blueprint behind the breakdown. And from that blueprint, you begin to build not towers, but temples, not machines, but meanings. And the moon pulses above, not as a clock, but as a compass. And now you do not seek direction, you create it. By the way you walk, by the way you love, by the way you love, by the way you notice the ordinary and treat it as sacred. And now, nothing is mundane, because everything carries memory and meaning. And the moon echoes this back to you in silver syllables that only your stillness can interpret. And this stillness is not laziness, it is luminous. It is the stage upon which the soul performs without audience. And now people begin to redefine success, not by accumulation, but by alignment, by how closely their outer life reflects their inner truth. And that truth is soft and strong and strange and stunning. And it no longer needs permission to be expressed. It flows like light through stained glass, creating beauty from difference. And the moon watches all this, not with curiosity, but with kinship, as if it too is awakening, and it is. For the moon has always been a mirror, and now that you have remembered how to look inward, the moon shines brighter, not because it changed, but because you did. And in that light you walk as memory and miracle combined. And in that light you walk as memory and miracle combined. Not separate, not sequential, but simultaneous. And this simultaneity becomes your superpower, because now you can feel the past and future vibrating in your fingertips, as if every gesture is a sacred agreement with time. And the moon nods in its orbit, as if to say, yes, this is the frequency we've been waiting for. And people begin to speak, not to be heard, but to be held. And every word becomes an offering, not for approval, but for connection. And now courage looks different. It looks like softness. It looks like tears. It looks like truth said quietly and believed completely. And the moon reflects it all in one uninterrupted breath, reminding everyone that reflection is not repetition, it is revelation. And in that revelation, you become both the question and the answer, and neither needs to be solved, just seen, just honored, just sung like a name you almost forgot, but finally remembered. And in remembering, you return. And in returning, you rise. And in returning, you rise, not above others, but into yourself, into the architecture of your own essence. And that architecture was never designed by fear, but by frequency. A blueprint of belonging that the moon always mirrored. And now the mirror becomes a gateway. And through that gateway, you see not just what is, but what could be if love was the loudest language, and kindness the currency, and attention the altar. And now attention no longer drains, it nourishes, because people have remembered how to see with their souls, and speak with their silence, and move not to escape, but to express. And the moon hovers in full bloom, casting its glow not just on oceans, but on intentions, illuminating the invisible bridges we've always walked, but never named. And now those bridges become visible, not because they appeared, but because you did, and you are no longer waiting. For the light you are realizing you are it. And that realization is not ego. It is echo, the reverberation of everything sacred finally returning. And that realization is not ego, it is echo, the reverberation of everything sacred finally returning to center, to source, to you. And now see not just what is, but what could be if love was the loudest language, and kindness the currency, and attention the altar. And now attention no longer drains, it nourishes, because people have remembered how to see with their souls, and speak with their silence, and move, not to escape, but to express. And the moon hovers in full bloom, casting its glow, not just on oceans, but on intentions, illuminating the invisible bridges we've always walked, but never named. And now, those bridges become visible, not because they appeared, but because you did. And you are no longer waiting. For the light, you are realizing you are it. And that realization is not ego, it is echo, the reverberation of everything sacred, finally returning. And that realization is not ego, it is echo, the reverberation of everything sacred, finally returning to center, to source, to you. And now the moon becomes less an object and more an oracle, and the sky becomes less a ceiling and more a canvas, and your breath becomes less a necessity and more a message. And every inhale is a reunion, and every exhale a release. And the body you once judged now becomes a cathedral, a breathing sculpture of survival and song. And people begin to treat each other not as roles, but as realms, as galaxies waiting to be explored, with reverence, not expectation. And the moon listens and responds, not with answers, but with amplifications, amplifying every act of tenderness until it reshapes the atmosphere, until the air itself becomes infused with memory. And now even gravity feels gentler, not weaker, but wiser, as if the earth knows you have remembered your weight, your worth, your wonder, and carries you accordingly. And in that carrying, you learn to carry others, not by lifting, but by listening, by making space, not just for their voice, but for their silence. And now, silence becomes a sanctuary, and people gather not to impress, but to integrate, to braid their truths together like constellations, forming new stories across the sky. And the moon glows softer, not smaller, but more intimate, as if leaning closer to witness the miracle of remembering. And now, the miracle is not escape, it is embodiment. It is arriving fully in the skin you once wanted to shed, and finding that it was never a cage. It was always a chrysalis, and the moon keeps watch over this collective unfurling, not as a spectator, but as a participant, illuminating each moment where someone dares to be seen, where someone whispers their wounds into the wind, and is met not with shame, but with sacredness. And now, people don't just dream at night, they dream aloud in daylight, turning sidewalks into sermons and elevators into altars, because every space holds the potential for awakening. And the moon nods, not out of approval, but out of remembrance, as if even it once forgot what it meant to glow for the sake of presence. And now, it watches as humanity blooms in real time, not into perfection, but into presence. And people begin to name their pain, not to hold it, but to hand it over to the light. And the light does not judge it, welcomes it, absorbs it, and turns it into wisdom. And that wisdom becomes the architecture of tomorrow, not built from blueprints, but from bravery. And now, children speak with the clarity of sages, and elders listen with the humility of students, and cities begin to breathe again, because the people within them are no longer hiding and no longer hurting in silence. They are turning sidewalks into stages for truth and rooftops into places of remembering. And in the distance, the moon pulses as if to say, yes, 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 this is the awakening we've been orbiting toward. And the world does not end, it opens. And you do not arrive, you expand. And every step forward echoes across. And every step forward echoes across generations, as if the present is a bridge, built from both prophecy and patience. And the moon smiles, not with certainty, but with surrender. Because now it knows the orbit was never the goal. The orbit was the offering, the proof that even distance can be devotion. And people begin to see time not as a thief, but as a teacher. And each wrinkle, each scar, each chapter, not as a flaw, but a footnote in a sacred text still being written. And the ink is memory, and the page is presence, and the margins are mystery. And the moon keeps turning, not because it must, but because it is. Trusts and trust becomes the new gravity, pulling people closer, not through force, but through frequency. And in that pull, they find peace, not because life is perfect, but because they no longer need it to be. They have made a home in the unfolding, and now even silence feels like celebration, and even stillness feels like song. And the moon watches with wonder, not of the unknown, but of the remembered. And the moon watches with wonder, not of the unknown, but of the remembered. And now, remembering becomes a sacred act, not of nostalgia, but of resurrection, because every moment you live fully, you awaken a version of yourself that once went dormant. And that awakening ripples outward like breath across still water, touching lives you'll never meet and timelines you'll never know. And now people begin to love, not for what they receive, but for what they remember in each other. And the moon reflects their joy in subtle shifts of glow, like a heartbeat syncing with the sky, and that sky becomes a canvas, not for prediction, but for permission, for possibility. And now, dreams no longer feel like fiction. They feel like fragments of a future, so true it's already speaking through the soil, through the soul, through the spaces in between. And the moon cradles it all, as if to say, nothing is lost here, only transformed, only transformed. And in that transformation, you discover you were never broken, only buried. And now the breath you take feels like a song from centuries ago, a hymn once sung by stars when the world was still dreaming itself awake, and your body remembers the rhythm, even if your mind forgot. And the moon pulses in tune with that ancient frequency, reminding you that time is not linear, it is lyrical, and every note you carry was never lost, just waiting for this moment of remembrance. And now people no longer strive to be seen, they strive to see, to witness the wonder in the weathered faces around them, to feel the poetry in someone else's presence. And in that witnessing, they create a new kind of wealth, one that cannot be stored, but only shared. And now wealth becomes the warmth you leave behind when you enter a room, the way your words ripple in someone else's courage. And the moon smiles not with pride, but with partnership, because it knows it too has been part of this remembering. And together you rise, not in rank, but in resonance, vibrating like prayers made visible. And now you know the vibration of your soul was never meant to be contained in silence. It was designed to be shared in presence. And that presence is not perfection. It is permission, the kind that invites others to breathe deeper, to live softer, to trust wilder. And now the moon doesn't just orbit, it participates. It sings in subtle pulses that brush against the atmosphere of your awareness, wrapping you in its echo until your heartbeat matches its orbit, and you feel for the first time not small, but celestial. And in that knowing, you let go, not out of loss, but out of legacy, because every step you have taken, every word you have spoken, every crack in your soul has poured light into this collective story. And now the moon begins to dissolve, not into darkness, but into you. And you realize it was never separate. It was never distant. It was never just rock and reflection. It was memory. It was message. It was the missing piece of your own, remembrance. And now the sky itself feels like skin, and stars like freckles on the body of God. And in this embrace, you no longer chase the future, you embody it. And you do not fear the past. You fold it into your heartbeat like scripture. And every breath becomes scripture. And every choice becomes cathedral. And now you know the truth, not as information, but as incarnation. Because you are the story. You sought the answer. You asked the memory the moon was keeping safe all along.